Lawrence Ben, buon pomeriggio, Lawrence. Thank you for joining us on Radio Italia in Adelaide.
Thank you for having me, Antonio, and good afternoon to all the listeners on Radio Italia Uno.
Yes, so you've got quite a job, Assistant Minister of Copper, Steel, Critical Metals and Minerals. Very important strategic areas for the state.
Very important strategic areas. I've got the privilege of being the Assistant Minister to the Premier for those areas, and obviously working really closely with Treasurer Tom Koutson-Tonis, who's the Minister for Energy and Mining as well. So it's been a real privilege to work with both of them on, as you say, what are really strategic areas for the state. Some of them have got challenges. You look at, Whyalla needs a new buyer, yes. Port Pirie is going through some challenges, but I say that by also pointing out that there are also huge opportunities for the state. If we can land the transformation of these assets, the challenges look like nothing compared to what the opportunities are and how they present themselves for the state.
And in the meanwhile, I should say congratulations for having been elected for the first time for the member of Enfield. I was having a look. There's quite a good pedigree of Labor MPs in this electorate.
I've got big shoes to fill, including for my predecessor, Andrea Michaels, who was a very hardworking member and cabinet minister for the Malinowskis government in its first term. So, look, it's a beautiful area. It's a beautiful community. And I've just really enjoyed hitting the ground running since the election to get out there and starting to meet with all the sporting clubs and schools to see how I can help them now that I'm a member of the government.
Yeah, so that electorate is just in the inner north. It's not quite overlapping with Tony Zappia's electorate, is it?
It does a little bit.
Okay.
So what's interesting about it is at the last boundary redistribution, Enfield jumped Grand Junction Road to the north for the first time. So I've got Walkley Heights, Jeps Cross and a bit of Northfield, and that's covering a little bit of Tony Zappia's electorate. But otherwise, it's predominantly south of Grand Junction Road.
Does that broaden the socioeconomic mix of the...
Look, it's an interesting question. It does and it doesn't. I would start by saying Enfield, I like to think, is just about the most, if not by far, the most diverse electorate in the state. I've got wonderful multicultural communities right throughout the electorate, from Blair Athol through to Northfield, through to Northgate and Lightsview. So in some ways it does, but in other ways it was already an incredibly diverse electorate. So it probably just adds a few other different elements that weren't already there, but otherwise it's a beautiful, diverse, vibrant community.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute, I think. So back to the sort of the big strategic assistant minister's job. I think you previously had worked in Peter Malinowskis' office, which probably makes it a lot easier in terms of understanding each other and having a relationship to develop strategies for these areas.
I think that's right. Someone actually asked me earlier in the week, who wasn't in politics, said, they're amazed by watching politicians. One minute you look at Chris Picton, he was the health minister, now he's the minister for the Department of State Development. I suppose that's one of the challenges of our system, but also one of the beauties that you do get a fresh set of eyes to look at something and, understand it from the perspective of the public and what they would expect. So it is always a challenge in politics to move to new areas. But as you said, I have been fortunate in that I've worked on these areas very closely as an economic advisor to the Premier for 2 years. And some of those projects, Whyalla and Pirie, but also BHP's expansion at Roxby Downs and some of the reforms we're trying to make with SA Water to facilitate more economic growth through industrial water. They were all projects I was working on closely with the Premier. And yes, it's helped me to sort of settle into this role, but it's also been exciting because I get to continue working in areas that I love and hopefully we'll start to see come to fruition in the next few years. So, they are really important areas for the state, and hopefully we can land a few of these planes to see the economic growth and jobs they'll provide for the next generation.
So where are we, from your perspective, for Whyalla and Port Pirie? My mum was from Port Pirie, by the way.
Oh, was she?
Yes.
I mean, beautiful town. I love both of those towns equally. They're probably, my two most favourite towns in the state, those two. And Pirie has undergone challenges with its smelter. Its smelter obviously underpins the whole town and its economy. As we've sort of said as a government multiple times, the global smelting industry is under immense challenges from certain global forces that are seeking to push down treatment charges, which are the charges that smelters expect for processing mining concentrate. Because of those global challenges, they really are trying to compete in what is fundamentally an unfair global market. So us with the federal government, and I should add the Tasmanian government because Pirie is linked to Hobart, we're trying to find a solution for Port Pirie that gives it a sustainable commercial future, which we think has a pathway through critical minerals. And I just touch on this because I think some of your listeners would find this interesting, is outside of China, there are probably only about 7 multi-metals smelters of the size and complexity that you find in Port Pirie. It's not just a dusty old lead smelter in Port Pirie. It is a really important strategic geopolitical asset for the Western world. And, you shouldn't give up on assets like that lightly. America gets a lot of its lead from Port Pirie. Other strategic partners around the world get zinc from Hobart. So we want to try and find a pathway through critical minerals, which are also linked to keeping that capability going in the Western world. And then on Whyalla, look, we're now 16 and a bit months into the administration process. We're really advanced in the sale process. We're now down to 2 shortlisted buyers. And without jinxing it, we're really hopeful of trying to secure a buyer before the end of this year, everything going well. So we've still got to navigate, a few challenges along the way there, but we're doing everything we can to try and underpin the future prosperity of those 2 really important towns.
Yeah, now we've been using the term critical metals, critical minerals. What are we talking about, and how do they matter in the global?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. What is a critical mineral? Because different countries define it in a different way. But I mean, at its core, they're minerals that are critical or fundamental or crucial, indispensable to important industrial processes, whether it's used in defense manufacturing or semiconductor manufacturing or other really important industrial manufacturing processes. Different countries, whether it's the US, Australia, or Japan, have different lists. So, for example, in some countries, copper will be listed as a critical mineral. In Australia, it's not. It's a strategic mineral. But on a few other, well, more than a few, a couple of dozen, there's, it's indisputable that they are considered critical pretty universally, whether it's heavy rare earths or antimony or bismuth and gallium. Now, these are all things that people might not have heard of for a long time since learning the periodic table.
Yes.
But the reason why they're so important is because their production and, more importantly, processing into metal has been concentrated into a very small number of countries, principally China, which, like anything, if you concentrate manufacturing or processing of anything into a very small number of locations, it creates risk for those who don't possess that processing. But I want to make this point about critical minerals, and I put the emphasis on critical metals, and that's in my job title, and it's an important distinction because we all know the importance of digging up and mining critical minerals, getting those minerals out of the ground. But it's one thing to dig those minerals out of the ground, but that is of diminished value if you don't have the capability to process it into metal. Because at the end of the day, if Australia mines it, but we've still got to send it somewhere to go through a smelter or a processing facility, then we've still got the same risk. So that's why I go back to Port Pirie and to some extent the Whyalla Steelworks, because you can mine all the minerals you want, but if you haven't got the processing capability, you've still got that strategic risk. So critical metals and processing is really, really fundamental to the problem.
Yeah, and that raises, well, as you were saying, special considerations for governments, both at the state and national level. And it's good to hear that you're collaborating across states with Tasmania. So how you're about to 4 months into the job on the other side of the divide. How does it feel? Is one thing advising someone what to do, and does it feel different actually being on the decision-making side?
Look, it absolutely feels different. I don't think there's no two ways about it. There have been a couple of moments in the House of Assembly. I mean, I think the first time you walk in and sit down at your allocated spot in the House of Assembly, you think there's only a few hundred people in all of South Australia's history that have done that, and it probably takes you a while to get used to it and to actually think that this is your job, right? This is what you're here to do. And there have been moments when you sit there and vote on certain things, and it weighs heavily on you that your community is expecting you to maybe vote one way or another. But it's very different sitting in that chair and you personally making that vote versus, as you say, being someone who's behind the scenes a bit more as an advisor. So it is a job that comes with a different weight. And I don't think it's something that none of my colleagues take lightly. We all take it really seriously because it is a huge privilege to walk into that building in North Terrace and represent your community. So it's different, but that being said, as I touched on earlier, you do learn a certain skill set from being in government that helps in some ways to navigate the different systems and bureaucracy to try and fix those little community issues. Right, someone comes to you with a roadworks issue. Who do you go to in the department to get that fixed? Or someone comes to you with an issue about work experience. Well, who do you go to in the Department of Education? So sometimes having those contacts and experience help solve issues along the way as well.
Yeah, well, actually, it's a nice segue into another question obviously I want to ask is what did you find and are you finding are the main issues of interest in the electorate at the
electorate? Yeah. Yeah, I think housing is an issue that comes up, and I think people were really pleased to see that housing was, the number one policy area that our government was really focusing on in the election. We've got some really clear targets and some really tangible ways that we're trying to address some of the challenges people have around housing. I think it's people looking at housing at all the different stages of life. So yes, there's first home buyers trying to get into the market. But there's also people who have gotten into the market, into a unit, and they've now got 2 or 3 kids, and they go, now I need my family home. And we know how tough people can find that too. But that's where they go, look, Labor's policy for incentivising downsizes for those who now don't need a family home to hopefully free up that family home is helping with that problem. Labor's policy for incentives around no stamp duty or the first homeowners grant is helping that cohort. So we're trying to do everything we can to address those issues, but do it in a way that comes back to the fundamental roadblock around housing, which is we've got to increase supply. So housing comes up a lot, but so do some of the associated issues around fixing the flow of traffic management and parking around the area. Now, that's an issue that's never going to go away for everybody, but I think I'm really keen to get in the weeds and do some planning studies because I think there are some small things you can often do around no right-hand turns here, no U-turns there, certain things allowed not during peak hour to just help with the flow to avoid rat running in back streets. And the third thing I would say is education. I was at Enfield Primary School this week. That they have a big site with some unused buildings and have room to grow, and there are neighbouring schools that are at capacity, right? So if we can try and fix some of these broader community issues around education to create more capacity in some places, free up more in others, and to just have me do everything I can to be championing time and time again to get as many resources into my local schools, that's what I'm really passionate about doing for the area as well. So they're 3 topics that come up a lot and are pretty universal, whether I'm knocking on doors or out having street corner meetings in the local area.
Yeah, I remember a few elections ago, Stephen Mulligan, I asked him this question. He said, undeniably, it's off-street parking, which is not even a state responsibility, but it's something that has an impact on people's lives. And as you said, if you can make people's lives better, that's an important job, important challenge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you said that, let's combine this Enfield thing and the political work. You worked a couple of years in the Premier's office.
Yep,
And prior to that, you worked as a practicing lawyer.
that's right.
So tell us a bit about that. So you had some interesting areas of expertise.
Yeah, and I think maybe if I start right from the beginning very briefly is I practiced law and didn't go into practicing law immediately. I worked for a trade union for a while, the SDA, where I met the now Premier when he was the secretary representing retail workers. And I did some industrial legal work there. Then my studies and to some extent my wife led to me moving to the other side of the globe to the US, where we had 4 fantastic years together, experiencing something different there. And then when I came back, I decided that I really did want to try and focus on, my legal skills and practicing as a lawyer. And those 2 years, so I did that for 2 years and then worked for the Premier afterwards. But those 2 years as a lawyer, for me personally, were just really important to sharpen up that skill set around writing a legal letter, my advocacy skills, whether it's at a tribunal or a court, and finding the right strategy to try and fix an issue. And for me, it's been important coming in as a local member, right? Because I meet with constituents and they'll come to me with an issue, and often we'll write to council, might hit a brick wall, but you go, well, what's another strategy for how we can get this done politically, legally, bureaucratically, and to think about the strategy to try and get some improvement for someone, even if you can't get them an overall win. So that skill set's been really important, and in some ways is, one of the most similar jobs that I've had to being a local member of parliament, because you get people come in saying, I've lost my job. What do I do? I got injured at work. What do I do? My small business is having this tax issue. How do I fix it? So that was a really good training ground for being a local member of parliament as well.
Yeah, and seeing how laws do or don't work or are or are not effective is important.
Exactly.
Can help in the drafting.
If I could add to that as well, Anton, I guess that was a motivator for me about why the jump from those jobs to politics. And for me, the motivating force was, it's good to be a lawyer to understand the system, but more often than not, I found myself frustrated with people getting caught up in a legal system that I didn't think was fair. So, I wanted to be a part of the system that wrote those laws and to try and do what I can to make them fairer for everyday people, which is what really motivated me to make the jump from law or advising to being in parliament, because I wanted to use that experience to go, how can we make this fairer for everyday people?
Yeah. And I actually have a similar conversation last month with Aria Balkas, comes in with also legal. So now you're part of a cohort of several new people who've entered in Parliament. Do you have little huddle meetings sort of to provide each other with support? And actually, okay, let's take a step back. I'm guessing it should be, like in any area, useful to have mentors, people with experience to go to and talk to, and even just absorb the tacit knowledge of the field. How are you doing that?
It's an interesting one. I just caught up with a few of my colleagues, part of the incoming cohort, for us to have a chat about how we're all going setting up our offices. So, you've got sort of advice and experience sharing in that way. There are certainly people who have been in Parliament and are still in Parliament who are sources of, advice. As I mentioned at the beginning, working closely with the Premier and the Treasurer on those portfolio areas has been an amazing experience for me to learn from them. But then there are also people who have now left Parliament who I've been really lucky to benefit from their experience. And, someone like Kevin Foley's been quite generous to me, sharing his experiences. And, I'll give you one example. We talked a bit about Whyalla. I mean, Kevin was around in the past when Whyall's experienced difficulties, and it's been useful to go to someone like him or others and say, well, how did you do it 15 years ago? What did you wish you did differently? So I think really trying to get advice from all those different groups, your contemporaries, those who have been around and still around, who have a lot of experience, and those who are, now outside of politics but can look back and go, maybe this is what I would have done differently, or what I think you should do. It's been useful to have a kind of spread of different people to get advice from.
And I guess Foley and Chrysantonis are good sources of colour and theatre.
That's right.
That's right. The process.
Keep it fun, which is important in politics as well, right? Like, it's there's some jobs where you spend a lot of time sitting at a desk, but politics isn't like that. It's all about people, and the rich diversity of people you meet in your community and in Parliament is what it's all about, right? And I think people who can, have a bit of fun with it and aren't shy about sharing their experiences is really awesome in politics as well. So,
cool. Okay, well, thank you very much, Lawrence. We've in and around about we've covered a lot of territory, very interesting insights, and so again, congratulations and well, good luck. Best wishes for the future of your career in politics.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to coming back again. And I wish you and your listeners all the best.